Yes. So water, it's all good. We can take water inside, but no other types of drinks. And you can even just leave.
So many steps.
352. I reckon it's way than 100. Did you remember to close the gate at the top? Awesome, thank you. Love that. Okay, awesome. Welcome everybody to Lake Cave, so you can tell where it got its name from. So we've got water coming from two sources in this situation. So the first is this water here. So what you're seeing, that's the groundwater table. That's what you're seeing there. And that can fluctuate seasonally, annually. Like you can see there's some lines on that formation at the back there. So they're different watermarks, and that can give you a sort of indication of how much the water can move around in here over some longer time scales. And then we've got the water that's dripping down on us from the ceiling. So that one comes from the rainfall. So the rain falls onto the forest floor, and then as it moves through the forest, through the soil horizon, through the limestone, that takes about 10 months for that water to get through to this side and to drip through. And as it's moving through the soil and the limestone, it goes through a bunch of different chemical processes. I won't bore you with the details, but essentially you end up with a little water drop here. The inside of that water drop, you've got a microscopic piece of solid calcite crystal. It's floating around in there, and that's what's making up this physical crystal here. So we call these calcite crystals. And that water drip, you can tell they've been dropping on the floor. So it'll drip down still with calcite crystals in it, and that's how we end up with these formations coming up off the ground. So it's just dripping in the same spot, so it's causing it to build up. So we've got our stalactites here. We call them stalactites because they're hanging tight to the ceiling. And then we've got our stalagmites coming off the floor because they might reach the ceiling. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next platform. Just hold on to the railing because sometimes you can get really caught up in absorbing it all, and then you might just like put your foot into the water. So just hold on, and yeah, we'll just casually swim. Okay, so I'm just going to give you guys some timelines to work from, because there's a few different processes happening, and they're all happening in these really abstract timelines. So I'll do my best to try and explain that to you. So first step was the limestone forming, and we were talking about it outside. So it's just a really old sand dune that's been sitting there for a long time, that's become really compacted and cemented together. So the limestone forming, that took 1.5 million years ago. That's when that was happening. And then that would have just been, this would have all just been dense limestone. It would have been dense limestone. So how did we end up with rooms underground? How did we end up with these caverns? So that's to do with the groundwater. So the groundwater, remember we were talking outside about how limestone dissolves with the water and washes away. So that's what's happened. The groundwater has dissolved away these rooms, and that happened 1 million years ago. And then, because we've got these rooms, that's allowed for all of this dripping to take place. So the dripping is 600 million years ago. So 1.5 million years for the limestone, that's actually quite young for a cave. So the oldest cave in the world is in New South Wales, and it's called the Jenolan Caves, and they're 300 million years old. So this one's just 1.5. Actually 1. The limestone is 1.5 and then the cave is 1 million. So yeah, it's pretty young. I'm just going to point out some different formations now. So see those really thin ones hanging from the roof? So every stalactite will be one of these in its early stages. So they're called straws, and they're like straws. They're hollow, the water drips through the centre, and at one point that centre is going to become clogged up, and the water, instead of heading all the way through, is just going to spill out over where the crystal is attached to the roof, and that's how you end up with these more wide at the base, tapered at the bottom stalactites. So all stalactites would have been a straw in their early days. And then we've got this one. So that formation there, you might think that's rock, it's actually a crystal. That's a type of calcite formation. And the reason for that is the water is dripping down and then it's sliding along the surface. And so it's almost like it's made a little blanket of calcite crystals, and it just layers itself. And you can see at the bottom there that there's a bit of, like, you can see the crust of it. So you can kind of get an idea of how thick it is. And so that would have formed on top of the limestone. But if you look underneath, you can see the limestone, that's washed away now. So that one on top, that's a flowstone, and the limestone has washed away. And you can see it here as well. And this is a really unique situation where the limestone underneath, it's washed away. And so that's just hanging on there by those two columns there. So that's really cool. These are columns. So that's another type of formation that you'll come across. So what happens is you've got your stalactites coming down from the ceiling and your stalagmites coming up from the floor. Happens for such a long time that they just join up eventually. And so those columns are holding up that flowstone because the limestone underneath is completely washed away. And that's a really cool thing that we've got here. So limestone caves, they're really common, but it's interesting, each cave will have something unique about it. So this cave, it's this formation here. It's not recorded in any other limestone cave, but that's not to say that it hasn't happened, it just hasn't been archived in the sort of the Western system. Yes, and then here is another great example of a column. So this column actually has snapped. So what's happened is the limestone that it was sitting on underneath, it's washed away and then it's fallen under its own weight. And then it's snapped, and you can see that the little straws and stalactites continue to form even after it snaps. So that's a really great example of how fluid those labels are. Like, there's no real firm boundaries between them. They're all calcite crystal getting deposited by water. There's just different behaviours for that. And then over here, this is a really great example of those holes. So I was talking about when the roots grow into the limestone. So that's an example just there, that little hole in the roof. So over time, rain will wash through that hole and that hole will get bigger and bigger. Awesome. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Oh yeah, I know. Sometimes the flies actually get through that hole. I'm just going to check quickly. Cool. Okay. You guys might know this hole really well. So this is a really undefined section. And if you look at every single little crystal formation, it's got a water drop on it. There's calcite there. Information from hundreds of thousands of years in the past, and it's same with the, it's more from the stalagmites, the ones that are coming off the floor. You can take a core sample from them, and then you can look at the occurrence of those pyrochemicals, those sort of fire chemicals, and then you actually get to see what the fire behaviour has been for the past hundreds of thousands of years. So that's a really cool thing. That's another water-soluble thing that shows up in the crystals as well. Awesome. So this is a nice little display of that suspended cable that we've got there. And so I'll just let you know now we're 62 metres below ground. We're 82 metres into the cave, but we're still 22 metres above sea level. So all of this water, and I know it's called Lake Cave, but this water is actually moving. So this water is flowing outwards towards the sea. If any of you guys are staying at Conto's campground, if you keep heading, or when you drove in this morning, there's a left-hand turn that says go to Conto's campground. If you head down that road, it's an unsealed road, but it will take you to a bunch of different car parks that will lead you to different areas on the coast. One of those places is Conto Springs, so it's where all of this water finally meets the sea. So that's really a fun thing to do as well if you're interested. And also from Mammoth Cave, if anybody went to Mammoth Cave down the road as well, the water that flows through that cave, they both end up at that same point. And it's got those tannins there. It's not some magnificent estuary or river mouth or something like that. It's just a sort of tannin-stained water seeping out onto the sand. But it's still really great to see the water's journey, which is really nice. So this one's for the kids when they're around. So this is our cave dragon. That's a bit of fire coming out of his mouth. So what I'm going to do in a second, I'm going to actually turn off all the lights. So we get to experience the cave in its natural state. Also get a bit of an understanding of what it would have been like for the first people to come through this cave, or anybody to come through this cave. You know, without this sort of electricity, imagine if you had some fire or a candle and you dropped it in the water, you know, you'd have to use your shins to help you find the way out. And so also having a think, so animal-wise, there's no animals inside this cave. We don't have, beside that fly that was there's no like glowworms. I know in New Zealand they have glowworms, or in some of the other sort of Asian limestone caves they'll have bats. This is a bit further underground. There's not much going on for them food-wise. There are styger fauna in the water. So styger means groundwater, fauna means animal, and there's also this endemic microbial community that lives in the roots of the karri trees. And so that is a, what's the word? It's a UNESCO threatened species, threatened ecological community. So that's really cool. So you're not going to be able to find that anywhere else. That's a distinct genetic population. And it's, yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions that come with a reduction in rainfall and what's going to happen to those types of water-dependent communities as well. Anyway, I'm going to turn off the lights. So if everybody could just get your digital devices and just put them away, tuck them under your shirt, face them in your pocket or something, because it really, you can really tell. To the idea of it being a really old sand dune. So that sand dune's been blown in. That's all that sediment's been blown in from elsewhere. So where does that sediment come from? It comes from when the sea levels went down during an ice age. So some of the ocean got frozen up in ice, so the water levels went down. And when that happened, the ocean floor was exposed. Parts of the ocean floor became exposed, and all of the bottom of the ocean floor became exposed. So when you think about the bottom of the ocean, there's a really thin layer of sediment, really fine sediment that sits in there. So that got blown inland. And what is that sediment made out of? So that's made out of fish bones, seashells, crab shells, lobster shells, things like that. And if you think about it, what do fish make their bones out of? They make them out of calcium. And the shells, it's calcium. So if you imagine you got that into a mortar and pestle, ground it out into a powder, and think about concrete when you add water to it and then it turns into a hard rock. And so that's what your limestone is. And if we think about our calcite crystals here and the calcium that's in the limestone, that's where that calcium is coming from. So because calcite is a form of calcium, just in case people didn't know. But yeah, so that's a really great journey. You're going from a living animal that's making its bones out of calcium. It's decomposed on the bottom of the floor of the ocean, been blown inland as a sand dune, and then become a hard limestone rock. The water's been slowly dripping through it over time, and now it's a calcite crystal here on the other side. So that's a really cool journey there. And then you see we've got this soil here. So all that brown stuff, they're called paleosols. So paleo means old, sols means soil. So it's just when those sand dunes were sitting there all that time ago, vegetation started growing on top of them, and that vegetation, it would decompose, and so that it's putting organic matter into the limestone formation. And what it does is it makes the limestone weaker, and so those paleosols have allowed that massive boulder there to just sort of fall down because the bonding wasn't strong enough. So these are some nice little formations we've got here as well. So these ones are called shoals. And what's happening is the water is dripping down the slope of the roof. Instead of dripping straight down, turning into a straw or a stalactite, it's sliding along the surface of the roof, and it keeps following the same path. Every drip that goes down, it'll leave behind it tiny little bits of calcite crystal that create these trend tracks, and it'll funnel every other water drip after that's going to follow the same path, and it builds up over time with these beautiful translucent sheets called shoals.
How long would it take for them to form, do you think?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. But I can tell you that in terms of like rate of formation, it's really hard to get a broad, generalized rate of formation because it really depends how much water is moving through that particular part of the roof, and that's to do with the topography of the roof. So you see how it's sliding down that way, and that was that really wet area that we're at before. So it's really hard to tell because it's also how much water is coming through that part of the roof depends on what's going on above ground. So if I give you an extreme example, if someone put a car park above that, there would be no water moving through that part of the ceiling, and that would affect the rate of formation. And then, so a less extreme example would be depending on how much vegetation is above the ground there, if there's a lot of trees or if it's only a few shrubs, and what their water demand is, how much water they're using. So yeah, it's really hard to get a rate of formation. So that sand dune that we're talking about, that limestone, that's now the limestone, that's the Lewin karst system, and so that goes from Augusta to Yallinga, and that's 90 kilometres north and south, and then it'll be 5 kilometres at its widest. That's that whole limestone system. And then inside of that 90 kilometres, there's over 110 caves. We've got this group here, this Cape Foundation, there's 4 that they have open to the public, and then there's the state government. There's a few that the state government monitor, and there's 2 of those that are open to the public. So there's Calgata and there's Giant's Cave as well. So there are another couple of caves along this road that you can visit. It's a different setup. It'll be, you go into a small cabin, they give you a hard hat and a torch, and then you can just walk in. But there's no boardwalks or anything, so it's a little bit more messy. I'll also just quickly tell you guys about the water. So that bushfire that went through in December 2021, it's ended up with all of this water coming up really high. So the reason for that is the fires come through and it's burnt off all of the leaves on the trees, all of the leaf litter on the forest floor, which essentially means there's no water demand above ground. So when the winter came after that fire, all this rain fell onto the floor. There were no trees with leaves that needed to transpire all of that water. So the water just went straight down into the groundwater. It just followed with gravity all the way down into this groundwater system. And because we were talking about this being the groundwater table, So what happened, technically they would call it, you had an increase in groundwater recharge and this water level has come up. So that's how that fire's interacted with this cave, which is really interesting as well. Awesome. So that's all from me. And so now we've got just over 5 minutes for you guys to just make your way back to the entrance, and feel free to take some photos as well as you're making your way back. But if we could just sort of slowly move in that general